barrel.
Welcome back to the After Hours podcast. I'm your host, Francisco. Co-host today, I have Joey, and we are joined with Gregg Snyder from Chicken Cock Whiskey down in Kentucky. What's going on, Greg?
Hey guys, thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Oh man, it's all our pleasure. And what you been up to?
Well, trying to make a little good whiskey when I have time.
Yeah, for sure. I was able to look at a little bit of your biography. It seems like you've been in the industry for a little while now, seasoned veteran.
Yes, sir. I started back in 1978, actually. Right out of college, I had an opportunity to go to work for Joseph E. Sigerman's son. They had a facility in Louisville, Kentucky, and started out there as a frontline supervisor, and that kind of laid the foundation for my career in the spirits industry, which is now in its 43rd year.
Wow. That is incredible. I mean, it's not often that we get to have a guest with this much experience in the industry. So my first question really is how have you seen it change over 40 years?
Lots changed. When I got into it in the late 70s, the whiskey industry was kind of on a slow decline. I guess my era, guys, people I grew up with, the taste had kind of shifted away from whiskeys and more into the lighter goods, the vodkas, the rums, the gins, and what have you. And for me personally, I was weaned on bourbon. So my dad was a bourbon lover. And so that kind of pointed me in that direction as well. But so a lot's changed. I mean, on its decline, there was a lot of things that the industry used to do that they no longer do due to financial reasons. The finance department's kind of took hold of the reins, and we're looking at ways to cut costs. And they did that in many, many ways. And it's kind of cyclical. I'm just thrilled to death now to see the industry boom once again. And I saw it bottom out in the 80s, and now to see it thriving again is so gratifying.
So you're based in Kentucky, and it sounds like your first job was in Louisville. So are you a native to Kentucky, and that's where your operation is now, right?
Well, believe it or not, I actually live in southern Indiana, right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. That's where I grew up most of my life, and went to Indiana University, and I grew up in a little town called New Albany, which is Indiana, which is right across the river, like I said, from Louisville. But yeah, as far as the spirits industry, I've worked primarily most of that 43 years in the Kentucky area.
Right on. I mean, you really couldn't have picked a better place. So,
well, it's perfect for whiskey making. It's as they say, bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States, but 95% of it's made in Kentucky, and there's valid reasons for that. So,
yep,
yeah, absolutely.
Do you actually want to get into some of those reasons, Greg?
I can share. Be glad to, guys. Essentially, back when the immigrants were kind of moving west in the U.S. from the East Coast, you can imagine what they had to go through to get through the Appalachian Mountains. And once they got through the Appalachian Mountains, they got into Kentucky and found more rolling hills, fertile ground where they could grow grain. The water is basically all the tributaries, all the riverways in Kentucky have a limestone bed, and so that limestone actually acts as a natural filter to filter out a lot of sulfuric and compounds and heavy metals, and so it's ideal for making great whiskey. Likewise, the climate. We've got 6 months of cold temperatures, 6 months of hot temperatures. You can get above 100 in the summertime, you can get below zero in the wintertime, and so that 6 month of cold, 6 month of hot is ideal for maturing whiskey. As the temperatures heat up, the molecules of that whiskey are flying around, and the airspace inside that barrel expands, which pushes that whiskey into the wood of the barrel through the char layer and into the wood, and picking up some of those great phenolic compounds and flavorings that the wood possesses, the white oak possesses. Then in the wintertime, of course, it cools down and everything contracts inside that barrel. So it's the changing of the seasons and the night and day as well. That are moving that whiskey in and out of the barrel just from temperature changes. So again, typically that's ideal. And what they found, early on, I think most whiskey makers were focused on making a lot of rye whiskeys because that's kind of what they were used to. But they found that corn was a very abundant and easy to grow in this part of the country. And so that's why corn actually became the dominant grain used in bourbon whiskey.
The more you know. I had no idea about that. So that's cool. We actually are fortunate enough to have some of the rye whiskey with us here today, as well as the straight bourbon. So what would you recommend for us to take a first go at here?
Well, I think we ought to first try the bourbon. I usually, and then when we're trying these twos, I try the bourbon first and then the rye because the rye's got a little bit more spiciness to it. So typically try to let folks try the bourbon first.
All right.
I don't know what your listeners know about the brand, but what do you think the first question is when I do conduct tastings?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Typically, the first question I get is, "Where'd you come up with that name?" And so, I said, I didn't come up with the name. The brand originates all the way back to 1856 in Paris, Kentucky. And the gentleman that started the distillery and started the brand, James A. Miller, as the story goes, he had a whiskey that he felt was worth crowing about. And so that's why he called it chicken cock whiskey. Likewise, you got to remember in 1856, Americans were using the Old English language, and the Old English term for a male chicken was a cock, and kind of like South Carolina gamecocks. But so yeah, that's kind of where the name came, and it kind of stuck with it. And chicken cock actually had a long history, a lot of neat history, pre-prohibition, during prohibition, and post-prohibition. But it thrived up until the 1950s when the distillery actually burned down, and the company that owned it at that time decided not to rebuild, and the brand just sat idle up until 2012. The founder of Grain and Barrel Spirits actually was looking for a whiskey brand that had a lot of history and stories around it, and so he actually discovered chicken cock, and Marty Ansel is his name, and Marty actually acquired the brand rights and had focused to resurrect it back to Kentucky. So I hooked up with them about a little over 3.5 years ago, and helped them through my consulting services with the supply chain, and basically, essentially, Marty shared his vision to resurrect the brand back to Kentucky, and so that's kind of what I've helped him do here over the last 3+ years.
Yeah, that's a great story, Gregg. And we're drinking it straight out of the bottle. Is that the best way to drink it, or is there any other way we should try?
Well, you drink it how you like it. I tell people, if you want to mix Coke with it, that's fine too. I'm not such a snob on drinking whiskey that for me, though, personally, I drink it neat, or I drink it on the rocks. But I like to try it when I'm doing a tasting. I definitely, I'll put it in a Glencairn or some type of glass that has, will hold the aromas and kind of allow the alcohol to subside, dissipate. But again, I think you get the best aromas when you're able to stick your nose inside a glass and then likewise taste as well.
I mean, you hit it right on the head. I mean, the first time that we ever try anything, it's always got to be, not usually straight out of the bottle, but yeah, definitely neat or on the rocks. I would say that's our go-to.
I think it's just a great way to test out the flavor originally before you kind of go and mix anything in it.
For sure. It's amazing sometimes, you pour it in a glass and kind of like decanting wine, you got to let it open up, let the alcohol kind of dissipate off a little bit, and more of the flavors actually come out. And then after you do taste it neat, sometimes it's neat just to drop a little ice cube or just a drop of water in there. And it's amazing, the transformation that takes place with some of the flavors actually opening up. The molecular structure kind of changes with that little bit of H2O in there, and it really opens up some of the flavors.
Well, I just tried the bourbon, and I don't really have a great phrasing to put with it other than it tastes like Kentucky, and it tastes very, very good. It's warm, it's strong, obviously, but it's something that I could drink by itself. It really doesn't need a counterpart in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, both these offerings, the bourbon and the rye, the Kentucky Straight Bourbon and the Kentucky Straight Rye, they're both 90 proof. And one of the things I try to do when we selected this proof is, I try the whiskey at various proofs, from 80 to 86 to 90 and even higher. And I try to find that sweet spot where, once you start diluting it, you want that alcohol burn subside just enough to allow the caramel and vanilla and other great flavors in that bourbon kind of overtake the profile. And I felt with both of these products, 90 proof was a sweet spot on those. You still get that little Kentucky hug as it goes down the throat, but it's not overbearing. It's just a nice little warm feeling. It doesn't burn you away.
Gregg, I love that terminology, a Kentucky hug. I've never heard that one before. I'm gonna have to start using that.
No, but yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that. It's like you said, it's strong enough to where you get all those great flavors, but I mean, Me myself, I mean, who doesn't like a little kick in their drink? So I think it accomplishes the best of both worlds. And then next up here we have the rye. So that was the straight bourbon, and we're gonna give the rye a go right now.
I noticed right off the back the kind of more like amber, a little darker color in the rye than the regular bourbon.
Yeah, it's got more of a burnt orange tint to it, I guess, but it's unique in itself. This is one of, we have and I didn't get to talk on it earlier. Back when I started working with Grain and Barrel Spirits to resurrect the brand back to Kentucky, I negotiated a collaborative distillation agreement with Bardstown Bourbon Company. Not sure if you're familiar with those guys, but they have a great operation and some great people. And basically, through that collaborative distillation program, I provide them with our mash bill. So for our bourbon, our mash bill is 70% corn, 21% rye, and 9% malted barley. And then I also give them the work instructions as far as the time and temperatures for cooking, the fermentation specifications, all the beer chemistry specifications, distillation specs, and then also I select the barrels. I even take it all the way back to the log. Through my consulting services, and this is something that Chicken Cock is unique probably in the industry, that I have oversight of every step of the process, from selecting the logs to cutting the staves and heading, to overseeing the barrel production, ensuring that the barrel's toasted properly and charred properly, and then oversight the production of the whiskey. When they're making our bourbon or our rye whiskey, I actually go down to Bardstown, which is about an hour drive from where I live, and oversee the process when they get started mashing. So it's, like I said, it's a little bit unique that I have oversight from start to finish, all the way back to selecting the logs for the barrels.
Yeah, no kidding. I believe what I had read as your position for Chicken Cock was that you're the master distiller, but I believe you've done pretty much everything under the sun in terms of operating a distillery, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Throughout my 43 years, I've been very blessed, worked for a number of great companies, and have had basically worked in every aspect, including the cooperage. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 12 of my 43 years in the business, I actually worked for Brown-Forman, and 9 of those 12 years, I managed their cooperage operations. They're actually the only distillery in the country that I know of that has their own cooperage operation to make their own barrels.
Jeez, all right. Well, I guess next, I mean, while we're talking about your extensive resume here, you were a part of the Kentucky Distillers Association and served as the chairman, I believe, right?
That's right. I was on the board of directors for quite a long time, and then during that stint, I also served as chairman of the board. Yeah.
What is that organization based on?
Well, it's made up of distilleries in Kentucky, and it's really grown with the boom of the industry. But it was primarily started out as the lobbying arm of the industry with the Kentucky state legislature, and then likewise on a national level. There's an organization called Discus that actually now serves as the lobbying arm on the federal level. But the KDA, the Kentucky Distillers Association, they not only have a presence in Frankfort at the capital in Kentucky, and keep an eye on legislation related to the industry, primarily and mostly on taxes. But then likewise, more and more, they've done a lot more with the marketing and brand industry exposure. They started actually the Kentucky Bourbon Trail for those who've ever been on the trail or have heard about it.
Yeah, I've heard great things from other people that we have talked to about the Bourbon Trail. So, I mean, really, I think Joey and I just need to spend some more time in Kentucky.
I agree.
I think that's the underlying issue here.
So, Greg, this is a little off topic. How many different bourbons and whiskeys would you say you've tried in your lifetime?
Jesus, man. Oh, wow. A bunch, because it was interesting when I worked at the cooperage for Brown-Forman. We made barrels not only for Brown-Forman, we made barrels for just about everybody in the industry at that time, in the whiskey industry. And so I got out and got to visit all the distilleries and have a great network of friends that I've established over the years. And of course, when you're selling other companies' barrels, you get to sample their whiskeys as well. So, but man, there's no telling. I couldn't begin to count. But again, I've been very blessed and have tasted some awfully fine whiskeys over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, like you've seen it all. So how has marketing, especially with the upward trend of like distilling, in the 20th century here or the 21st century here, how has marketing changed since the late 70s, like early 80s?
Yeah, it's. I think it's taken on more of a prominent role. Back in the 70s and 80s, um, and even in the 90s. Our industry was very careful. Back in those days, even though it wasn't illegal, nobody had any advertising on TV whatsoever. Again, it wasn't illegal. It was just kind of an unwritten rule within the industry that we weren't going to advertise because, people would take it the wrong way. They, oh, well, there's kids that are watching TV and you're trying to promote your products to kids. And so the industry's always been very, very sensitive to that and very careful with how that's handled. Over time, especially with the craze of the boom again, with the whiskey becoming in favor again, you see more and more advertising, and especially with the social media opportunities nowadays. So marketing is taking on a huge role.
Do you do any of the social media content?
Do I personally do any social media content?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I do a bunch of different podcasts and what have you, on Instagram, on Zoom, on Zencaster, on YouTube. I've done virtual tastings. So yeah, it's and then we, of course, the advertising as well on Facebook and what have you, Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine obviously the pandemic and the year 2020, things have gotten a bit crazy. So are those like your new outlets now, is doing podcasts and virtual tastings?
Yeah, it's funny, you still, even with the challenges we face in life, you still find ways to get things done. And that's kind of what's happened with this pandemic. I've had numerous events planned, like the New Orleans Whiskey Festival a year ago when this pandemic really hit. The morning I was supposed to fly to New Orleans, the event got canceled. And so again, you find ways around it, other ways. And just like today's, going forward, I don't think the business world is going to be the same because a lot of companies found that people can work from home and be just as efficient. So.
Yeah, that's funny. Joey was actually doing a webinar earlier, and that was one of the topics that got brought up. Is Zoom and working from home, is that just a fad, or is that just going to be a part of normal life now? And Joey, I'll let you take your first crack at it here.
Yeah, so we were doing a webinar for high school students. They kind of have like a career fair type of thing going on, and that was a question that got asked in all three sessions. And we think it's not really going away. I mean, especially in our industry, about half of our employees are remote right now. And even if COVID ends in the foreseeable future, they're still going to all be remote. And I think that's kind of how it's going to start shifting too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. In a lot of areas, they found that it's like I said, it's easily doable and probably just as efficient and less costly.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, one thing that I think of right away is just the fact that people there's no longer like a commute to work. There's no longer these small incremental things that are blocking you throughout your day. Like you can be at home and just plug in for, 5-6 hours, have lunch, whatever. And I think people are more efficient when they're at their most, comfortable, when they're in their own house, they're setting what they like. So I think it's going to be around. I don't think it's a fad anymore.
So let me ask you, did you guys get to try the rye then? We kind of took off on a tangent here, but the rye whiskey itself, what are you smelling? What are you tasting on it?
Yes, we did try the rye, and typically, I'm a pretty heavy rye drinker. It compares in all the other ryes I've had. It is definitely top tier, but for me, whatever reason, that bourbon just keeps calling me back. I mean, I love the rye, but that bourbon that you guys have is something special.
And that's, everybody's different. Some people prefer the rye over the bourbon and vice versa. The rye itself, actually, that's a part of our collaborative program that we have with Bardstown Bourbon Company. That's where we actually made that whiskey. It's a 95% rye, 5% malted barley.
Yeah, so I noticed with the rye that it smells almost a little bit sweeter than the regular bourbon. I don't know if that's actually if it is or not, but that's kind of one thing I noticed right off the back.
Yeah, it's got a lot of spicy notes to it. I like the smoked meat. I've got a big green egg, and I make my own dry rub sometimes. and I use a lot of paprika and cumin, and I get some of that in the aromas. But then on the taste as well, you get a few peppery notes, little soft peppery notes, not overbearing, but that spiciness comes through. But then, as you said, the sweetness as it sits on the tongue, man, some of that caramel vanilla flavors from the barrel itself actually come forward, and you get a nice sweet finish to it as well.
I absolutely love the design of the bottles themselves. It's like the chicken wire around like the bottle, and it's very cool.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's those bottles are actually replicas of pre-prohibition bottles that Chicken Cock was bottled in. And you're right, that embossing, it's like a honeycomb embossing on the glass. That's what that mimics is chicken wire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, that's awesome. I mean, and also too, like the clean logo with like the matte green and the matte blue with like the white and the gold shining on top of it is a really clean design. And like we've seen plenty of the bottles that we've tried and stuff, and I mean, this is top tier design. I mean, it's one of my favorite bottles for sure.
I agree. Yeah. And kind of going off of that, did you design it yourself, Gregg, or did you have somebody design it for you?
No. That actually, the founder of Grain and Barrel Spirits is the one who decided to, because we have another bottle as well that we use some of our limited time offerings in, and it's got it's a flask style 750 milliliter like these. Of course, back then they didn't use 750 mils; they used pint size bottles. So we just increased the bottles to a 750 milliliter size and made replicas. But the other bottle, it's a flask style bottle. It's got a starburst embossing in the glass. It's called, and then it has a cork finish. But on top of the cork, it has a metal cap that screws down. It's what we used to call a jigger cap. You can use it as a shot glass.
Yeah, man, that's dope. Are all of your bottles designed like the same way here?
Yeah, we just had the two styles of bottles, and again, both of them are replicas of pre-prohibition bottles that Chicken Cock used long ago. And again, that's Monty, the founder of Grain and Barrel. He's the one that wanted to maintain that tradition.
Mm-hmm. So Chicken Cock, like, so was the era of prohibition like a problem for them, or do they still like operate under the rug?
So yeah, it's like many distilleries, they didn't have the financial means to acquire a medicinal alcohol permit. They were quite expensive, and so the distillery shut down, like most distilleries. And the brand actually sold to a company up in Montreal, Canada, called Distillers Corporation Limited, and they were. It's actually the old Seagram's company, actually. But this was during Prohibition. They sold the brand up there, and they made a rye whiskey up in Montreal. They would actually take that rye whiskey, bottle it under the Chicken Cock label, and then they would put it in a tin can and seal it in a tin can, because that tin can would protect the bottle when they would bootleg it back across the border into the U.S. And so it showed up in a lot of speakeasies. But one of Chicken Cock whiskey's claims to fame is it was actually the house whiskey at probably the most famous cotton club during the Roaring '20s, and that was the Cotton Club up in Harlem, New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you ever heard of Duke Ellington, Duke Ellington was a big time band director and so forth, and musician. Mm-hmm. And in his memoirs, he talks about Chicken Cock whiskey being the house whiskey at the Cotton Club.
Really? That's so cool. That's awesome.
Before Prohibition ended, though, National Distillers had a medicinal alcohol permit. They acquired the brand back, started the distillery back up in Paris, Kentucky, and actually bottled Chicken Cock with a medicinal alcohol label. If you ever get to Kentucky, in Bardstown, Kentucky, there's Oscar Getz Museum, and they have the entire history of the whiskey industry in Kentucky. And they have a lot of those old prohibition bottles on display down there. And they have some of the old Chicken Cock bottles. They have the medicinal alcohol permit label on it as well.
So when it had the medicinal alcohol label on it, like were people still just drinking it at home, or was it like legitimately used as a form of combating?
Well, I think you had to have a prescription to get it, but I don't think it was too difficult to get a prescription.
Well, I mean, that's good. And then, when did you start with Chicken Cock whiskey?
So, I started to see, it was the summer of July, I guess, of 2017. I decided to finally ramp up my retirement plan and get out of the corporate rat race. And that wasn't to retire, but to start my own consulting company. So that's when I first hooked up with these guys through some mutual relationships. And they were looking for some help with their supply chain. And they also own a product called Dixie Vodka, which is growing very well as well. But So they hired me in my consulting services initially to help with some supply chain issues, some operational issues. And then as Marty and I got to talking one day, he was sharing his vision that he wanted to resurrect chicken cock back to Kentucky and bring it back to its high quality prominence that it had many, many years ago. And so I signed on to do that. Now, at the time, you got to remember this was 2017. 5 years earlier is when Marty actually acquired the brand rights. And like most business strategies, you need cash flow. And so early on, he bought some young whiskey. Some of it was flavored, but they had a bourbon. They had a bourbon rye blend, and it was young whiskey. It was okay to make a mixed drink out of, but it wasn't high quality sipping whiskey. And one of the things that Marty agreed to when he asked me to be the master distiller is that as long as we stop bottling this young stuff and truly focus on bringing the brand back to resurrecting it back to Kentucky, but bringing it back to its high quality prominence. And yeah, I would love to do that. That's kind of how I hooked up with him.
For sure. How long does it take for a distiller to transition from quote unquote young whiskey until they can like start mass producing that high quality caliber whiskey that you guys were aspiring for?
Well, I mean, the way we're doing it, basically, as I told you, I think with Bardstown Bourbon Company, we laid down our first bourbon there in August of 2018. So we're not gonna bottle it till it's at least 4 years old and probably older. In the meantime, part of my responsibility is I go out and I try to find good quality whiskey on the market, aged whiskey that's available for sale, and that's not easy. I mean, it's like treasure hunt. Sometimes you find treasure, sometimes you don't. But it's hard finding good quality whiskey. If it doesn't meet our quality specifications, then we don't buy it. If it does meet it, then typically it's pretty expensive to acquire, which kind of drives the price point up a little bit as well. So, but in the meantime, that's kind of what we're doing to bridge the gap. We're doing a lot of limited time offers. This past year, we came out with a chicken cock 15-year-old barrel proof. It was 114 proof. There was only 1,371 bottles produced, and every bottle was sequentially numbered, but it was only sold in Kentucky since it was such a small volume. But we've done some other collaborations. We've done 2 collaborations with Goodwood Brewing Company where I gave them empty bourbon barrels. Once we dumped them, they would put a beer. The first time they put a walnut brown ale in the barrels, and then about 8 weeks later they dumped it out. When I got the barrel back, I put bourbon back into it. That was called Chicken Cock Beer Barrel Select. And then the most recent collaboration we did with them was they put same thing. I gave them 6 empty bourbon barrels. They put a blonde ale in those barrels. And then when I got them back, I put a rye whiskey back into those barrels. And so this one was called Chicken Cock Righteous Blonde, righteous spelled RYETEOUS. So little play on words there. But both of them unique in flavor. They had some malted barley notes from the beer. The walnut brown really paired well, give a little nuttiness to the bourbon. On the Righteous Blonde, again, the malted barley really came through the flavor, but it really complemented the caramel vanilla notes and some of the sweeter aspects and spicy aspects of the rye whiskey.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, but both of them very good. The Righteous Blonde, I just love it. I'll put it a little Glencairn, after I have a great meal or something. I think it just has a right amount of sweetness for me that I just sip a little of that for after dinner. It's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. And Gregg, this is kind of going back a bit, but you had mentioned that you guys check on the whiskey. What's the process for checking on the whiskey to see whether it's ready to be sold or not?
So yeah, for the beer barrel collaborations, I would check it every few weeks to see how it was, because you don't want to overpower it. When you're finishing a whiskey, a bourbon, or a rye in a secondary barrel, you just want enough flavor to complement the flavors of the bourbon and the rye whiskey. You don't want them overpowering the base whiskey in those barrels. For the barrels that we have sitting in the warehouses down at Bardstown Bourbon Company, I check them every 6 months to see how they're progressing. And I can tell you, I just checked them here about a week ago. We have, the one whiskey now is 2.5 years old, one is 2 years old, and one is turned to 1 year old next week. And all three batches are doing great. And then we just laid down another 1,000 barrels of bourbon in the first part of February, and then 200 barrels of rye last week we laid down again. So we're filling up the warehouses and looking forward to the future. because we got some great whiskeys that are aging right now.
And how many 750 milliliter bottles can you get out of one of those barrels?
Holy cow! Well, it depends on the age and probably where it was located. But let's see here. If we do some math real quick, if you got a second here.
Oh yeah.
Well, I tell you what, rough rule of thumb, what I figure is you can get about 20, let's say 25, 12 bottle cases of 750 milliliters. So what, 25 times 12. So you're looking at 300 bottles of a barrel.
Wow. Okay. That was more than these barrels are a little bit bigger than I was thinking then.
Yeah, they're 53 gallon. It's a standard whiskey barrel, 53 gallon barrel.
And you said as they age, with the whiskey going in and out of the barrel, you kind of lose a little bit of that.
Yeah, you've heard the term angel share, I'm sure.
Yep.
But for me, to me, the best, a lot of younger companies, due to cost and due to labor constraints, are using palletized warehouses where they actually set a barrel upright on pallets and then they stack the pallets on top of each other and side by side. And, you can age whiskey that way. It just takes a lot longer because the barrel's got to breathe. And when you start stacking up all these pallets side by side, top on top of each other, that barrel can't breathe. And not like it should be able to. So in the old traditional style rick warehouses, where they actually roll the barrel into a rick, you got air all the way around that barrel, so the barrel can breathe better. So what happens in that process, and again, it depends on where it's located in the warehouse, but most of those old style rick warehouses are 6 stories, 6 floors high, 3 tiers per floor. So you're looking at anywhere from 18 to 21 barrels high in that building. And what happens is ethanol is heavier than air. So as the alcohol evaporates out of the barrel, because that wood, it's solid and it doesn't leak, but yet it's semi-permeable. So oxygen can get in the barrel, ethanol, water vapors can get out the barrel. What happens is that as a water molecule is smaller than ethanol molecule, if the barrel is in the top floor of those warehouses, it's extremely hot up in the top of those warehouses. It's probably 10 to 20 degrees hotter up there than it is outside. And so what happens is that the ethanol that evaporates out of the barrel, the ethanol vapor is heavier than air. So it settles down on the lower floors. All the ethanol vapors within that building are down on the lower floors. So if you walk in from outside, it's like you walked into an air-conditioned room. It's just like an alcohol bath. It's so cool on the lower floors, where conversely, it's so hot on the upper floors. So with the water molecule being smaller than the ethanol molecule, the water molecule will find its way out before the ethanol molecule. And typically, the barrels that are stored on the upper floors, the proof will actually increase. If you go into the barrel at 125 proof, which by law, that's as high the government will allow you to put it into a new barrel, and call it bourbon, it'll actually increase in proof. Again, conversely, on the lower floors with all those ethanol vapors, it's much more humid and cooler down on the lower floors. So it's the theory of equilibrium, where you got so much moisture outside that barrel, the water molecule doesn't want to leave the barrel, and so the ethanol molecule leaves it. And so the proofs will actually decrease on the lower floors. So there's a lot of chemistry going on, and with oxygen getting inside the barrel, it kind of creates a process called esterification, where a molecule, alcohol molecule, will join forces with an acid molecule, and it creates esters, and that's where you get a lot of your flavors and aromas. So it's throughout the maturation process, it's creating flavors, destroying flavors, and recreating flavors. And it's a pretty interesting transformation that takes place. If you ever tasted whiskey right off the still, man, you can taste the corn and the rye or wheat and the malted barley. But man, it's phenomenal if you know what that tastes like, to see where it finishes up after it's matured properly.
Greg, that's super interesting. We've interviewed probably about 10 different distillery owners, and that's one thing that's actually new to us. I didn't know that the different levels of floors actually have a factor in how the product turns out.
Very much so. Yep, very much so.
I would imagine this is like a well-known thing. So if you're operating in one of these warehouses, like, do you have to like continuously rotate the barrels throughout the warehouse, or?
So it's an interesting, great question, because I talked about it earlier, where in the 70s, 80s, the finance group were looking for ways to cut costs in that. That's one of the ways they cut costs, because years ago, when I started the industry, we would do that. We would rotate barrels based on how they were progressing in maturation, but that was expensive. I mean, you take a whole crew and you spend a day just moving barrels up and down. It's not real productive. And so what happened was, most companies got a little smarter, and they said, you know what? When they make a batch of whiskey, they put some barrels on the lower floors, some on the middle floors, and some on the top floors of that same batch. So then when it is proper age and they pull it out of the warehouse, they get a good cross section throughout the warehouse. And since they're blending all those barrels together anyhow.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, that's a good way to, I don't know, cut your costs and be innovative there.
Yep. Well, that's
So,
what the majority of the industry. There's a couple distilleries that claim they still rotate barrels, but I wouldn't say they rotate all of them.
Mm-hmm. We had interviewed Traverse City Whiskey Co. up in Traverse City, Michigan, and their
those
theme,
guys.
Yeah, no, they're great, and their theme is like whiskey of the North, and they would take pride in the fact that Michigan gets all 4 seasons in abundance. And I mean, one of the great things that they were able to highlight is the fact that during winter seasons and the summer, the constraints and the permeability of the barrel, and that's how they get different blends within their whiskey and how it gets like different flavors. So I thought that was really cool.
Yep, good guys. Yep, they're. I've worked with those guys on a couple of things. So making some good whiskey.
So I know you've been in the industry for a while. So do you work with tons of other distillery owners in the industry?
No, not tons of other. I've got probably a half a dozen clients that I work with. From my years in the industry of the cooperage industry, I actually picked up a client early on in my consulting career, is out in West Virginia, called West Virginia Great Barrel Company. Some guys that are members of the Greenbrier out in White Sulphur Springs. They were wanting to get together one Christmas party, and they started talking about how they could create jobs for that economically depressed area of West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. And one of the guys was Tag Gallion. Tag is one of the co-founders of Smooth Ambler Distillery outside of Lewisburg, West Virginia. And, Tag was talking about where he had problems getting some barrels, the year before. And so that kind of prompted him looking at, well, maybe we should build a cooperage. Because in those Appalachian Mountains, there's some really, really good high quality white oak growing. And so anyhow, they hired my consulting services. I did a market feasibility study that showed that the way the industry was booming again, that the demand for new barrels was going to exceed the capacity that the cooperages had available to supply. So they moved forward. I helped them build a cooperage. I helped them build their stave mill. And that's actually where Chicken Cock is getting its barrels from. That's where I actually go out. I train their employees at the stave mill, taught them how to properly quarter saw the white oak logs, how to edge them up, how to stack them so they can properly naturally air dry. And then I actually, like I said, I go out there. I was just out there 2 weeks ago, overseeing the production of the 200 barrels for the rye whiskey we just laid down in Bardstown. But then while I was out there, I actually selected the logs. I went through over 1,000 logs and selected tight grain oak logs that are going to be used for our bourbon and our rye in 2022 as well for the barrels.
So within the distillery industry, are like barrels, are they like hard to come by? Are they like a coveted thing that gets created in masses, or are they like continuously being moved from one facility to another?
Yeah, well, what's happened from them, to be a bourbon, and again, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but number one, to be a bourbon can only be made in the United States. In 1964, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution claiming that bourbon whiskey is a distinct product of the United States of America. So a lot of people think if it's bourbon, it can only be made in Kentucky. No, that's not true. Most bourbon is made in Kentucky, about 95% of it, but you can make bourbon whiskey anywhere in the United States of America. Outside the United States of America, you can make it, but you can't call it bourbon whiskey. Now, likewise, to be a bourbon whiskey, the TTB regulations, the Tax and Trade Bureau regulations mandate that, number one, it has to have 51% corn in the mash bill. It can't come off the still higher than 160 proof. It has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel, and it can't go into a barrel higher than 125 proof. If it meets that 4 criteria from day one, it's bourbon whiskey.
Awesome. Yeah, the more you know.
And is it hard to meet all those criterias, or does it get pretty easy after you've been doing the process?
No, not at all. I mean, that's what everybody's mash bill is based around. And then, that you asked about the barrels. Since that time, since that study I did, two of the larger cooperages have actually expanded. They've built additional cooperages to kind of help offset the supply demand issues. So right now the demand's good. It's barrel industry is pretty competitive, which the distilleries like for sure. But there's some good options out there.
You mentioned a market feasibility analysis. You went to Indiana University, and what was your degree in?
I have a business degree.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So would
I have
you
a business degree, business administration from IU, and then I also have an MBA from Bellarmine University in Louisville.
Cool. Yeah. So would you say that like because like business is so universal and it can be used within any industry? I mean, you got into the distilling industry, but could you see yourself in other places working and using your consulting knowledge?
Probably. There's a lot of overlap in other industries as well that are similar. However, the whiskey industry is one of the few industries that you've got to be a pretty good forecaster, if you will. If short of having a crystal ball, what you're making today, you're going to be selling, 4, 6, 8, 10 years from now. And so you've got to be pretty good at forecasting what your sales are going to be, because you got to make it today. If you make too much, then it's going to get costly sitting there. If you don't make enough, then you're going to miss some sales. So it's a juggling act. It can be very very difficult.
So kind of going off of that, Greg, when you make like cost and revenue projections and anything along those lines, do you actually try to predict 5 to 10 years out then?
Absolutely. Oh gosh, a long time ago, I created a model that I use, and I actually teach a class. I don't know if you've ever heard of Moonshine University in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm actually teaching a class next week on next Thursday. They call it Age-ucation, AGE-ucation, kind of play off education. But it's a course where myself and another gentleman, Andrew Wiebring from Independent Stave Company, we teach. It's about barrel maturation and warehouse management. That's primarily the part I teach. Andrew gets into more of the chemistry and some of the unique things that they do in experimentation and research.
Very cool. Yeah, I had never heard of Moonshine University, but yeah, that's very cool, and probably going to check that out. I mean, why not?
They've got some great courses. It's amazing the number of people that have attended their courses, and they teach you not just how to make whiskey. They teach you how to make any type of spirits. They have courses, that teach you how to make rum, vodka, gin, you name it.
Have you experimented with some of the other types of spirits besides whiskey then?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, throughout my career at all the companies I've worked with, I've been involved with just about every spirit there is in the U.S.
Would you say that whiskey is the hardest?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're going to put it into a barrel, there's a lot goes on inside that barrel. And so it can be difficult to predict how it's going to end up. But that's why you taste it and do the homework as it's going forward to make sure you know where it's headed.
For anybody that would be new to the industry, what would you recommend for anybody that's just now starting to distill?
Well, I'd recommend taking a course at Moonshine University, unless you have some background in it. It's amazing the number of people, especially with this boom that's kind of transpired over the last 5, 10 years or however long it's been going on now. A lot of people say, hey, I want to get in the whiskey industry, and they don't really realize everything they should before they take that leap of faith. And so it's best to really get your ducks in a row, learn how to make the whiskey first, and all the various aspects of what to do, what not to do, and then lay out your business strategy, your business plan accordingly. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, so to speak, but you want to have a game plan in place, because then it goes well beyond just making the whiskey and aging the whiskey. You've got to have the sales structure and then the sales network established as well to make it happen.
Kind of going off of that. So when you're first starting distilling whiskey, is it hard to, I don't know how I want to word this. Is it hard to is it capital intensive? Because if you're not selling anything for 2 to 4 years, it seems like it could be pretty hard to make it within those first few years.
Absolutely. It is. And if you're going to get into it, you better have a lot of money and you better have a lot of patience. Again, the business strategy is kind of like with grain and barrel spirits. There's so many companies. I could probably sit here and list 50 off the top of my head that actually followed the same business strategy, business plan. They put into place the resources to make whiskey, whether they built their own distillery or work with another company to make whiskey for them. And then in the meantime, they go out and they try to find whiskey that they can put under their label to generate cash flow. If you didn't do that, then you better have a heck of a lot of money and a heck of a lot of patience, because you're going to sink all this money into it, and then you're probably going to have to wait at least 4 years old till it's 4 years old to have a product coming out. Some companies, they've been dumping barrels younger, and that's fine depending on what your strategy, what your quality strategy is for your brand. If you're not trying to compete at a higher level, if you're trying to compete at a much lower price level, then that may be okay. But so it just depends on the nature of what you want to accomplish.
Throughout your journey, what would you say was the most important resources that you've gained, or like who was a mentor to you to get you where you are now?
Well, I've had a lot of mentors. That's the beauty of this industry. On the production side, it's a brotherhood basically. I can give you countless examples of when say we ran out of a tub of or a barrel of label glue and bottling, and our shipment didn't show up, and I could have called one of many distilleries, and if they were using the same glue, they would throw it in the truck, run it over to me. Or if I had a motor that burned out and I didn't have a spare, I could call any one of those distilleries, and if they had a spare, they could throw it in the truck and bring it over to me. And then when I got mine in, I'd replace theirs and so forth. So, but it's always been a great brotherhood. And we, even though we're competitors, we always look out for each other. On the operation, the sales and marketing side can be a little bit more competitive and more cutthroat, but on the operation side, it's been great. And when I started in 1978, I had a bunch of people I worked with that were great mentors to me. Throughout my career, I've been had the opportunity to work with and got to know so many friends. I was managing director of Wild Turkey, for example, for a little over 10 years. And Jimmy Russell and Eddie Russell worked for me during that time period. But, Jimmy's one of those guys. He's really the last of the true Mohicans, I say, as far as when it comes to the old time, the old guard master distillers. Jimmy's just a great guy. And, but, we'd have get-togethers, Jimmy and Booker Noe and Elmer T. Lee and Parker Beam and we'd have a great time. We'd get together and tell stories and drink each other's whiskey. And so it's a lot of camaraderie there that I've been blessed to be a part of over the past 43 years.
Yeah, that brotherhood, that's a beautiful thing. Do you know if that same brotherhood translates to other parts of the United States, or is that just a Kentucky grown thing?
Well, since we're all here close to each other, I'm sure it is Kentucky, but even throughout, I think people in the industry, especially a lot of the craft distillers and that, when you get in this industry, you're not only an ambassador for your brands, but you're an ambassador for the industry if you're going to do it right. If you're not going to be an ambassador for the industry, then you're not helping yourself fully.
Do you know if that's the same camaraderie is built, let's say with like brewing companies or, yeah, I guess brewing companies would be like the closest example.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really worked that close with the brewing industry, but I'm sure there is some likeliness.
For sure. And what experiences do you take from all of your leadership positions that you've had? I mean, the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, and what are you able to bring back to the Kentucky community with all of these leadership positions and the knowledge you were able to gain?
All those things that I've been fortunate to be a part of, they transcend into, being a part of the community. It's one of those things that you get involved within the industry, And I learned a long, long time ago when I started at Seagram's. One of the mentors I had was a guy by the name of Jim Moorhead, and Jim had a great way with treating people, and he earned people's respect. And so that's one of the things I think I learned early in my career was that you treat people like you want to be treated, and you earn respect. You don't demand respect, you earn respect. And most of those, I mean, every job I've worked in, I tried to personally do it. When I went out to Cooperage, I didn't know other than that they were made out of white oak, I didn't know the first thing about making barrels. And I personally tried every job in that facility so I could gain a better appreciation for, how hard people were working and what it took to make a great barrel. I didn't do it day after day after day, but yet I actually tried every job in that facility.
That's a great philosophy. I really like that approach to understanding like the workers and where they're coming from, and then obviously their day-to-day responsibilities and struggles.
Well, and it's quite honestly, I mean, and Jim taught me this, it's we're all a part of a team, and most of the places I've worked, there was a union environment, and some were probably more combative environments than others. But there again, you had to get past that, and you didn't take it personally. You just basically you approach the same thing. As I said, you treat people with respect, and you'll be treated with respect.
Absolutely. And if you were not a part of Chicken Cock Whiskey or offering consulting services within the distilling industry, what could you see yourself doing as a career path outside of this?
I'd probably be doing more hunting and fishing, to be honest. I love the outdoors, and that's kind of what I enjoy doing when I'm not doing anything within the industry.
For sure. We're gonna start, firing off some little off-topic questions here, some fun questions. My first one is going to be, after a long night of studying products, what would you say is your hangover recipe?
Oh gosh. Don't know that I really have one. I mean, my blood runs about 90 proof right now as it is, so I don't know that I've got issues with hangovers in a while. But my younger days, for sure, I definitely did. But I don't know that I really have a surefire hangover recipe.
Well, that's like the opposite of everyone else, because it's like, the older you get, the worse the hangovers get. But for you, you just become ingrained in the environment. So when you were younger, you used to get the hangovers, but now it's too easy.
Well, you learn to respect it as well. I mean, it's not it's not something to take lightly. So
the last distillery we interviewed said they don't call it drinking, it's called research and development.
That's right. Sampling.
Yep.
And going back to your Indiana University days, what is one memorable moment that sticks out?
1976, Bobby Knight and the basketball team, undefeated NCAA champions that year.
Jesus.
Were you going there during that time?
I was a sophomore.
Wow. That must have been insane to witness and be a part of.
It was indeed. Yeah, those were great days.
Do you still follow college sports?
I do. Unfortunately, my Hoosiers aren't faring as well as I would like, but that's life sometimes.
Yeah, we're both from Michigan, so they're actually doing pretty well this year.
Yes, they are. They are indeed.
We're looking forward to the tournament starting. Next week?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Coach Howard hasn't playing good ball. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what would you say is one of your favorite vacation destination places?
Oh, wow. Gosh, I've got numerous, I guess, but I'd say if I lived up in Maine for 3 years, actually, for a little while, I worked for a company called White Rock Distilleries up there, and I absolutely love Maine. But I enjoy going up to northern Minnesota and into Canada fishing. I've got an aunt and uncle live up in International Falls, Minnesota, and they have a cabin over in Canada on Rainy Lake. And I don't get up there as often as I'd like, not near as often as I'd like, but some place like that. If I can get out on the lake or out in the woods hunting, I'm at peace.
For sure. What's your greatest catch?
my
biggest catch or my greatest?
Either or, both.
Well, my greatest catch was my wife. We dated since we were juniors in high school, and we'll be celebrating our 43rd anniversary in May. So.
Congrats.
Yeah, congrats. It's awesome to hear. She's gonna love hearing that on the podcast as well.
But no, as far as fishing goes, I had some friends out in the stave mill business out in Missouri, and Leroy Cardwell, and Leroy was an outdoorsman as well, and he would invite a bunch of us in the industry, in the cooperage side of the industry. Every spring we go out there in the Osage River and we'd snag spoonbill. You ever heard about snagging spoonbill?
I have not.
I don't think
Familiar
so.
with a paddlefish, what a paddlefish looks like?
Yeah, for
They're
sure.
kind of bottom feeders, and they basically open their mouth and let the water flow through them. They eat the plankton out of the water, so they don't eat bait or anything, and so you can't really fish for them other than snagging them. So it's legal to actually, you're trolling along with big treble hooks and you're snagging them. And so I caught one that was 72 pounds one time, but they get well over 100 pounds.
Ooh.
Yeah.
How long did that take you to reel in?
It wasn't too bad. It was like reeling in a log. Really, it was probably about 5 minutes. It wasn't real long.
Okay. And what about as far as hunting goes?
Well, I'm an avid turkey hunter, and but I hunt everything.
Okay.
I mean, I love, I've got a number of things. I've never had an opportunity to elk hunt, which is on my bucket list. I'd like to go down to Argentina to waterfowl hunt and maybe dove hunt. That's on my bucket list. But I like to wing shoot, whether it's pheasant, quail, dove. But turkey hunting is probably my biggest passion. Any type of hunting that you can talk to the animals and try to talk to them and call them in. So
yeah, here in Michigan, Ohio area, buck hunting is definitely one of the, deer hunting is one of the biggest things that we do around here.
Sure. No, I love the deer hunt as well. I just don't get an opportunity to do enough of it. This past year was so warm, and I don't like going out hunting deer because if I have to trail them very far, then the meat can spoil on you if the temperatures are too warm.
If we ever come down to Kentucky, what are some places that you would recommend in terms of like food and dining?
Oh, there's all kinds of them, actually. Louisville has a great selection, but even Southern Indiana has some great places. If you ever get down to Bardstown, I highly recommend you go to the Bardstown Bourbon Company, where we're actually making and aging our whiskey. They have a restaurant down there called the Bottle and Bond, and it is fantastic. It's one of the best restaurants in Kentucky, in my opinion.
What's the go-to menu item?
Oh, they have a variety of all kinds of things. I mean, they have from high quality cut steaks to fried chicken to fish and salmon. I mean, you name it. They've got a pretty good variety.
All right, sounds good.
Definitely have to give that a try when we come down.
Oh, for sure. And then bringing it back to the whiskey industry here, you said that there's a lot of planning and forecasting that goes into it. How has COVID thrown a wrench into projections that people might have had a couple of years ago?
I don't think it's really had any impact. The industry, while the restaurants and on premise, the bars and restaurants haven't been open to sell. While that side of the business has diminished, it's more than picked up on the off premise side, the liquor stores. People having to stay home. They still went to liquor stores and stocked up, and so I think overall the industry is really done quite well considering.
And I know we kind of touched on this briefly earlier, but do you think that's something that's kind of going to stay the same throughout these next few years?
I don't think so. I think, as some of the states have loosened up some of their restrictions, the bar scene and the restaurant scene is slowly coming back. And so, I think they'll get back to where they were at one point.
Yeah, man, people are just itching to get out right now.
They are indeed.
Especially especially like a lot of the people that, I hang out with and our friends, dude, just it cannot come fast enough. So just waiting to turn the corner.
Yep.
Do you have any questions for us?
Not really. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. I've always find it interesting and enjoy talking about chicken cock whiskey. And, for me, it's, I'm able to take my 43 years in the business and really take everything I've learned in that time frame and focus it on this chicken cock brand. And so I'm having fun. I'm having a ball.
Yeah, for sure. I can say confidently that you are one of the most knowledgeable guests we've had on through, your industry experience, but then also like the fine chemistry that like literally goes into distilling. Like it's really crazy. And then the fact that you're able to recount the countless connections and experiences you've had along the way. This has been one of the best podcasts. So thank you for being a part of it.
Okay, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
And Gregg, where can people find you on social media and your website as well?
Well, on Instagram, I'm at CC Master Distiller. And if you want to go on find the Chicken Cock website, we're at www.chickencockwhiskey.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gregg.
All right, After Hours Nation, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to stay updated, you can check out our site at afterhourscast.com. Don't forget to tune in next Tuesday morning for our next episode. After Hours Nation, stay thirsty, my friends.